In addition to being a paleontologist and geologist, I'm also an artist, and one project that I've been working on is to do a series of life reconstructions for animals and plants that lived during the Triassic period, the beginning of the age of dinosaurs, and specifically animals and plants that lived in the western United States during the last 30 million years or so of the Triassic period, between about 230 and about 202 million years ago. I really enjoyed the research that I've been doing for this project, and so whenever I complete one of these illustrations, I'd like to spend some time talking a bit about the science behind it, and also about the sort of logistical problems and decisions that have to be made when you're doing a reconstruction of this sort, since we oftentimes have to rely on very, very scrappy fossil material from which to derive the appearance of an animal or plant that's been dead for over 200 million years. So I want to get a bit into the process behind that. Just as a word of warning, these videos will be a little more technical than some of the other videos that I've worked on, and geared more toward an audience that has more experience with paleontology in general and Triassic paleontology in particular, but I hope that the rest of you can enjoy them as well. So without further ado, let's talk about our first strange little animal. In this video, we'll be talking about a little armored reptile called Vancleavea campi, for which I did a skull reconstruction, skeletal reconstructions both with and without its spectacular covering of osteoderms, and a life reconstruction. Vancleavea was first described from the Chinle Formation in Petrified Forest National Park in northern Arizona. In 1962, the park naturalist Philip Van Cleve collected a fragmentary skeleton of the little reptile which included several strange osteoderms. This material was found near Blue Mesa in the southern part of the park in the upper Blue Mesa member of the Chinle Formation, which dates to about 219 million years old. In their landmark 1995 Bulletin on late Triassic tetrapods, Robert Long and Phil Murray described the specimen as a new genus and species, which they named Vancleavea campi, in honor of Van Cleve and Berkeley paleontologist Charles Camp, who did some of the early pioneering work on paleontology in petrified forests during the 1920s and 1930s. Long and Murray deduced that Vancleavea was some kind of weird armored neo-diapsid, but beyond that they weren't exactly sure what it was or what it looked like. That's all that was known about Vancleavea until the late 1990s, when paleontologist Alex Downs was working on one of the blocks from the Ghost Ranch Coelophysis quarry in northern New Mexico. This locality is famous for producing thousands of skeletons of a little late Triassic theropod dinosaur called Coelophysis. These strata in which the quarry occurs are at the top of the Chinle Formation, and are sometimes called the siltstone member or the rock point member of the Chinle Formation. Although it should be noted that the type section of the rock point member is in northern Arizona, and it's not completely certain that the siltstone member and the rock point member type section are exactly equivalent stratigraphically. In any case, these strata are certainly much younger than the Blue Mesa member, and maybe somewhere in the ballpark of about 205 million years old. Mixed in with the dinosaur skeletons, Alex found an amazing, nearly complete skeleton of an armored reptile just over a meter long, and a partial skeleton of another individual underneath the first one. This is a replica of the more complete specimen. The skeleton is somewhat folded and twisted up, which will be important when we try to reconstruct it. Alex and Brian Small of the Denver Museum of Nature and Science discussed the Ghost Ranch specimens at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology annual meeting in 2002. That same year, Adrian Hunt, Andrew Heckert, and Spencer Lucas of the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science, along with Alex, identified the Ghost Ranch specimens as Vancleavea. In the following years, a number of other fragmentary specimens were described from the Petrified Forest member of the Chinle Formation in Arizona, and from the Dockham Group in New Mexico, which filled in the age gap between the Blue Mesa member and the siltstone member specimens. The type material for Vancleavea was also described in more detail. All this material can be assigned to Vancleavea based on a number of diagnostic features, including the distinctive osteoderms, especially the large keeled osteoderms covering the belly, and the presence of paired keels on the underside of the dorsal vertebrae. Additionally, the femur is a curiously simple element lacking a well-developed head and many of the distinctive trochanters and tubers you normally see in reptile femora. In 2009, Sterling Nesbitt, Michelle Stalker, Brian, and Alex described the Ghost Ranch specimens in detail. These specimens were the main basis for my reconstruction, but it should be noted that they're smaller than most of the other specimens. The heavily armored skeleton of Vancleavea is so striking that it's easy to miss how weird the skull is all by itself. Back when I was a student in the late 1990s, Brian showed me a cast of the skull of the Ghost Ranch specimen without telling me anything about it or where it came from, and quizzed me about what I thought it was. I suggested a pelycosaur like Dimetrodon, which is kind of what it looks like. Vancleavea has this very weird, compact little skull. Most neodiapsids, including most archosauriforms, have two temporal openings at the back of the skull, but Vancleavea only has one huge lateral temporal fenestra and a remarkably narrow skull roof in which the upper temporal opening has been completely closed up. In most reptiles, both openings are usually attachment sites for the big adductor muscles that close the jaws, but in Vancleavea, only the huge lower opening seems to have been doing that job. The big temporal openings in the narrow skull roof also makes the skull look a little bit like the skull of a plesiosaur, although plesiosaurs have what's called the euryapsid condition, in which the upper temporal opening is retained and the lower one has been lost. Moreover, the skull is strongly heterodont, with big fang teeth that fit into complementary depressions on the upper and lower jaws. The forehead slopes downward and the back of the lower jaw is extremely deep. Again, all these features make the skull look remarkably pelycosaur-like. One critical feature that gives away the identity of Vancleavea is the brain case. The lateral sphenoid, the bone forming the front part of the brain case, is ossified. This is a feature of Archosauriforms, confirming not only that Vancleavea is a neodiapsid, as argued by Long and Murray, but it specifically is on the Archosaur lineage like most Triassic reptiles. Osteoderms are also a common feature found in Archosauriforms during the Triassic period, and a few other cranial and postcranial features help mark Vancleavea as an Archosauriform, although it lacks apomorphies of crown-clade Archosauria. This identification makes the skull of Vancleavea even weirder, because in addition to the loss of the upper temporal fenestra, there's also no anorbital fenestra or mandibular fenestra, both features you normally see in Archosauriforms. Vancleavea was apparently closely related to an animal from the Middle Triassic of China called Litorosukis, another heavily armored aquatic predator. Interestingly, this seems to have been a pretty popular lifestyle among basal Archosauriforms during the Triassic period. Vancleavea and Litorosukis may be closely related to another group of Archosauriforms called the Doswellids, and a little more distantly related to the Proterosuchids, Proterochampsids, and Phytosaurs. All of these are thought to have been aquatic predators, and most of them were heavily armored with long snouts and prominent pointy teeth that were probably good for catching fish and other prey. Another couple odd features about the skull. The nostrils are dorsally placed, a common feature in aquatic animals that allows them to breathe while fully submerged, with only the tops of their heads showing. In addition to being short and deep, the skull roof is also pretty narrow, even accounting for it having been crushed, and the orbits are huge. Eyeballs normally fill up most of the orbital opening, but if this was the case in Vancleavea, the eyeballs might have had to bulge out the sides of the head a little bit. This is interesting since the eyeballs of frogs and crocodilians also project out of the orbits to help them see above water, and this may have been the case with Vancleavea as well. I tried to show the eyes bulging out and up in the life reconstruction, but I don't think I quite captured it. There seems to be distinct sets of vascular foramina along the margins of the jaws that look more lizardy than crocodile-like to me, so I did give Vancleavea lips. My skeletal reconstruction differs a little bit from the one presented by Nesbitt et al. In 2009. Only a handful of Vancleavea vertebrae are known, and the ones in the Ghost Ranch specimen are mostly covered up by the osteoderms. The skeleton of Litorosukis, described in 2016 by Chinese paleontologist Chinle and his colleagues, can help us make some plausible tweaks to the skeleton of Vancleavea. The skeleton of Litorosukis is also covered in osteoderms, but the vertebral column is actually pretty well exposed. One change I made from the Nesbitt et al. Reconstruction is to show the long, slender cervical ribs hugging the cervical vertebrae as they do in Litorosukis, a feature seen in a lot of long-necked Archosauromorphs, including in theropods. Big adductor muscles, compact skull, massive lower jaw, and the big fangs all suggest that Vancleavea was not an animal you'd want biting you. Fortunately, the arms and legs are pretty puny, and the muscle attachment sites don't seem to be very well developed, so you could probably outrun it. It's likely that Vancleavea spent more time in the water or being flopped up on the shore than it did walking around. The reconstruction of the osteoderms of Vancleavea is probably the most accurate to date. Vancleavea is famed for being almost completely covered in armor from the neck to the tip of the tail. This may not be surprising since it shared its habitat with some pretty big aquatic carnivores, including phytosaurs and metoposaurs. Vancleavea has several very distinctive different types of osteoderms, and as already mentioned, the Ghost Ranch skeleton is twisted around pretty badly, leading to some important inaccuracies in how the armor has been reconstructed in the past. The belly region is covered by these very big shingle-looking osteoderms with a ridge running down the middle, but in the Ghost Ranch specimen the body is twisted around so these seem to be on the side of the body. The dark line here represents the midline of the back, and you can see how badly twisted around the skeleton is. As a result of this distortion, most artists, including me, have tended to show these shingle-like osteoderms as being on the side of the body. Here's a couple of my older reconstructions doing this. However, Nesbitt noted that the sides of the Vancleavea are actually covered by these more complicated-looking osteoderms with a forward-projecting prong. It seems plausible that these osteoderms might have been defensive in nature. Crocodiles and birds tend to swallow prey, especially fish, head first, since fish are streamlined to go down easily that way. and Triassic predators like Phytosaurs and Metoposaurs might have tended to do the same. The forward-projecting prongs on Vancleavea might have made swallowing them headfirst a little more difficult. The underside of the neck also has a cool gular basket of these little teardrop-shaped osteoderms, and the tail has a row of osteoderms that look kind of like hockey sticks running along the top that may have supported a fin. There's a lot of aquatic animals with tail fins of various types, but Vancleavea is the only one known that actually formed the tail fin from osteoderms. The limbs are also covered by these little round, irregular-shaped osteoderms, although the exact arrangement of these isn't totally clear. There's probably some errors with how I've reconstructed the Ghost Ranch specimen, but this is still probably the most accurate reconstruction to date. Vancleavea is known from a long time range, about 20 million years, and also from a wide range of sizes. So it isn't clear if all this material should really be considered the same species or even the same genus. The Ghost Ranch skeletons and most other specimens represent smallish animals, maybe a meter or two long, in the small to mid-sized crocodilian range. However, there are some massive denities and a few other big elements from the Redonda Formation of the Dockham Group in New Mexico, collected by Axel Hungerbeeler of Mesalands Community College, that were presented in a poster at SVP by his student Ryan Price. These suggest an animal over 3 meters long. At least for the time being, it's not clear if the smaller specimens are juveniles or close-related species. Hopefully more complete skeletons will turn up outside of Ghost Ranch to clarify this issue. Thanks for watching.